Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin and also risk on assets in general and make comparisons to the US dollar currency index. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Now, one of the things we've said over the last several months is that as long as the dollar continues to rally, we are going to remain risk off, more than likely. This is based on a lot of historical patterns that we've seen many times in the past, in fact. And if you go look at this is the dollar, but if we go look at it over here, I have it overlaid with the price of Bitcoin. And as I've said before, when the dollar is crashing, that's what leads to the parabolic Bitcoin rallies. Okay, so the dollar crashing leads to parabolic Bitcoin rallies. Again, this is the dollar crashing in 2020 and early 2021, parabolic Bitcoin. Again, here it was in 2016, at the very end of 2016, going into early 2018. What did you get? You got a parabolic Bitcoin. Before that, we were sort of just playing in the sandbox down here. And even in 2019 and 2020, we were playing in the sandbox, or early 2020, we were playing in the sandbox until the dollar finally started to fall, and then Bitcoin went parabolic. If you go back even to 2014, we saw that Bitcoin was falling while the dollar was going parabolic. Okay? And again, in 2011, the dollar was crashing when Bitcoin was going parabolic. And then when Bitcoin was crashing, the dollar was going up. Okay? So we can quickly identify that risk on assets generally do not do that well when the dollar is going parabolic, right? We know that. We've seen it many times in the past. This is why, over the last few months, we say, this is a bear market through and through for risk on assets, namely because we're facing the dollar in its parabolic rally. And if history is any indication, whenever the dollar goes parabolic, like it did in 2018, like it did in 2014, there's a number of other times in history where the dollar went parabolic as well. But whenever that happens, it's risk off. Okay, markets go completely risk off until the dollar at least slows down. It does not mean that the dollar has to crash for Bitcoin to then just go sideways or give some nice returns. Again, even in 2019, Bitcoin went up 4x while the dollar was slowly going up. But it's these parabolic rallies by the dollar that you don't want to see. And that's exactly what we're getting right now. So the problem for risk on assets is that as long as the dollar continues to soar, it's showing that people are flocking to the relative safety of the dollar, right? And you might think like, well, how does that make sense? How can the dollar be safe? And especially in such an inflationary environment where you know that the dollar is going to be worth less a year from now than say other things. Well, the reason is because some people would prefer that than say to put their money in risk on assets if they think risk on assets are going to continue a bear market. Okay, so as I've said before, we've talked about the bear thesis many times. We've shown the evidence for the bear thesis for Bitcoin and for risk on assets in general. As long as the dollar remains parabolic, like it is, it's going to very likely continue to put a lot of downward pressure on the price of Bitcoin. Okay, so it doesn't mean that the dollar can't or that Bitcoin can't occasionally move higher, but it's going to continue to put downward pressure on the price of Bitcoin. And depending on how long the dollar rallies for will ultimately dictate how low I think Bitcoin will go. I think the next obvious spot for Bitcoin to go test, if in fact we are going to put in a lower low, is the summer of 2021 lows, right? So this would be the next obvious level for Bitcoin to test if the dollar continues to remain relatively strong. And that would actually also correspond to the lower bound of the corridor, and it would also correspond to sort of the upper band of our fair value regression band fit to quote unquote non-bubble data. So that I think is an area of interest to watch in the event that the dollar continues to move higher. And then it begs the question, well, how high can the dollar actually go, right? How high can it go? Well, remember, one of the things is if Bitcoin puts in that lower low, and we've been discussing this a lot. I keep trying to, to provide all the warnings that I can. If Bitcoin puts in a lower low, like it did over here in 2018, and like it potentially could do here, if it puts in a lower low, you should know the dominance of Bitcoin will likely go up. Okay, so the dominance would likely go up. And arguably, it is already starting to show signs of that. If you go look at the Bitcoin dominance, I think one of the things that you can take away from this potentially is that we are putting in a higher low, right? You can see the higher low. If you switch this over to Heikin-Ashi candles on weekly, you can see that we now have a green Heikin-Ashi candle on the Bitcoin dominance. And so the speculation is that as long as the dollar continues this parabolic rally, it's going to put downward pressure on Bitcoin, which, as we said, could lead to a lower low. If that leads to a lower low, that means the dominance of Bitcoin is likely going to go up, meaning altcoins remain incredibly risky. Okay, you also have things like the Nasdaq, which have recently put in a low as well. And this was actually, I was talking about this on the live stream yesterday, is that best case scenario, the Nasdaq bounces off of this level, best case scenario, and we try to talk about it being a double bottom. Is it possible that could happen? Yeah, it's possible, but the dollar isn't really showing any signs of letting up here. And technically speaking, the dollar or the Nasdaq has already put in a lower low. And so then I think, run the risk of basically coming down again to whatever, the bottom of this channel potentially, and seeing the Nasdaq go all the way down to, say, it's currently just over 13,000. For it to come down to 12,000 wouldn't really be that surprising as long as the dollar continues this parabolic rally. And then at that point, perhaps we'll get another bounce higher. So I think the thing to consider when sort of tying everything together is that as long as the dollar's rallying, which it is, you're likely going to see the Nasdaq have downward sell pressure sending it to the downside. You're likely going to see the same thing with Bitcoin, having trouble maintaining some of these levels as long as the dollar remains parabolic. And then it begs the question, well, where is the dollar going to stop? Well, to actually take a look at that, I think what we first need to do is we need to see where has it been in recent history. And so, we covered this bull market in vivid detail on the channel. And really, as I've said before, the bull markets for Bitcoin was 2017 and 2020, really. By the time we got to 2021, Bitcoin was sort of in the final phase of that bull market. And you can see this shown on the dollar chart. So where is the dollar today? And where is it going to stop? Well, if you take a look at where it is right now and sort of look at where it has previously been in, say, recent history, you can see that it's actually rallied above the March 2020 highs. Okay, it's now above that. The March 2020 highs more or less took us to just below 103 or somewhere around there. You can see we're now above 103. The highs in 2016 and early 2017, before Bitcoin went on a parabolic rally, topped out, at approximately 104 or maybe just below 104. Okay, now, do I think it's going to stop there? Honestly, probably not. And the reason I say that is from a macroeconomic perspective. You have to consider that, again, investors are very much spooked right now with what is the Fed going to continue to do as they continue to combat inflation. And I think people are just constantly worried about a soft landing versus a hard landing with regards to everything going on in the economy and in the stock market. And the Fed has a tough decision to make. Do they combat inflation, or do they just pivot and send us back into risk on? Which, by the way, if you think about it, risk on doesn't even necessarily always mean what you think it means. Yes, it means that asset prices can generally go higher, but one of the things that we've discussed with regards to asset prices going higher, if you look at things like the S&P divided by M2, what you'll notice is that one of the reasons that the prices do so well is just because of all the money printing, right? We are more, the asset class is actually was more overvalued with regards to M2 back during the dot-com bubble than it is today. Okay, so the argument is asset prices aren't necessarily going up just because the value of the companies are worth more, which I think a lot of companies are worth more today than they were 20 years ago, of course, but one of the reasons is just because of all the money printing. Okay, so it's like when the dollar is going down, you have to, it's like, well, I don't want to say you have to do anything, but it's almost like you're compelled to invest in risk on assets because you need to do something. Otherwise, you're just going to watch the valuation of your entire net worth deteriorate away if you hold it all in cash, because we know that cash is ultimately trending towards zero, the purchasing power anyways, right? Year after year after year, it's worth less and less. Okay. So, as investors, you almost feel forced to invest in risk on assets, because otherwise you're just going to watch your net worth deteriorate, because again, inflation will continue to make sure that your dollar is worth less next year than it is this year. The problem with phases right now are, again, that investors are spooked because of what the Fed's doing. And again, they say don't fight the Fed, which I think is good advice. Don't fight the Fed. The Fed is hawkish. They're still raising interest rates, right? They're rolling over the balance sheet, etc. And so investors are going to continue to remain spooked for a while longer. And you can see that as shown with the dollar. And I think for me, this is one of the main reasons why the dollar is continuing to rally, is because investors are sort of flocking away from risk on assets and they're going towards the relative safety of the US dollar. Now, you might think, how can the dollar be safe if we know it's going to be worth less next year than it is this year? But the problem is that there are people that think it's worth putting your money into that over, say, something that might just be in a bear market for months to come. Okay, so that is where the line of thinking comes from. Now, how high could the dollar go? Well, perhaps one area that we could start with is what happened in 2014 when it went on an absolutely parabolic rally. And we could overlay that and say, well, if it did it once upon a time, it's certainly possible that it could do it again. That would actually take the dollar all the way up to around 113 or so, if we were to just emulate what we did back over here in 2014, and we were to just say overlay it, maybe a little bit higher, but yeah, around 113 or so, which is actually close to this distribution phase that the dollar experienced back in 2001. So if we were going to go at the same pace that we went back then in 2014, we would have already been at those levels at 112 or 113. If we sort of move this over to try to catch this move as it's going up, you can see that at this rate, we should reach those higher levels again if the dollar continues to rally like this sometime by the summer. Okay, so maybe in July or August, we could see the dollar at some of these higher levels. And then if it finally starts to cool off, that could lead to a nice accumulation phase for Bitcoin before, say, another parabolic rally. But right now, the markets are certainly remaining risk off. Why do they remain risk off? Because the dollar is going parabolic. The dollar is likely going parabolic because investors are spooked over what the Fed is going to do to combat inflation. And they're spooked because CPI continues to go higher. So one of the things that might eventually cause the dollar to roll back over would be, inflation getting at least somewhat under control. I do think it's going to be an inflationary decade, to be completely honest. So even if inflation continues to go higher, it could look something like this, where it goes up for a while and then down, and then up for a while and then down. So it's there's phases where the Fed gets things under control, and then phases where we revert back towards the general direction that we're likely headed with inflation. So I look at the dollar and say, at some point we'll see some type of of an end to this move. One of the ways we can look at that, another way I should say, is looking at the relative strength index, and this at least gives us an idea of where things stand with respect to prior moves that the dollar has seen. For instance, on the weekly time frame, the dollar is oversold. It's approaching 78. It's already over 78. It's at like almost 79. The highest the weekly RSI reached back in 2014 or in 2015 was at around 88. Okay. If you look at, say, the 2-week RSI, you can see that we're currently sitting at around 77, and the highest it reached back over here during the last Bitcoin bear, or 2 Bitcoin bear markets ago, it reached around 90. So I think the point is to say, if this thing continues to rally for just a couple more months or so, we're likely looking at some type of a blow off top. Now, is it possible the blow off top comes before then? Is it possible that the blow off top is just simply at 103, which is where we've topped the last couple of times? It's possible, but to be completely honest, with everything going on in the world right now, and with the momentum that the dollar currently has, it's hard to imagine that it's necessarily going to just stop right at 103. But hey, I mean, if it does, then that means that Bitcoin's sell pressure should go away for a little bit, and maybe we can build out a base. Do remember though that after this parabolic rally ended, Bitcoin entered an accumulation phase where it still did relatively well. And after this parabolic rally ended, Bitcoin actually did really well. It went up around 4x. But the parabolic rallies for Bitcoin, where it went up to the next paradigm shift, did not occur until these major downward moves by the dollar. Okay, so if we get to a phase like this, like let's call this A, this is A, and then this is B. If we get to a B phase, then you're probably looking at an accumulation phase where Bitcoin could still do a 2 or 3x off whatever lows it's on, but it doesn't mean it's going to go take you to the next paradigm shift. So right now with the dollar, it looks like we're in phase A, and then at some point perhaps we'll go to phase B, which might look like this, and then at some point perhaps we'll go back to phase C, which is where the dollar comes back down. Looking at it a different way, we can also go look at just quickly, I wanted to look at the monthly RSI before continuing on. If you look at the monthly RSI, you can see, in fact, that it's currently at around 71 or 72, and where it in 2014 it topped, or 2015 was at around 82. Okay, and it actually had topped at around 82 back in 1985, before I was even born. And then previously before that, it was actually a lot higher when we first have data for it. So I think to the best thing to do right now, I think, is to sort of expect that the dollar is going to continue to go up. As we say, Bitcoin, it does look like a bear market. It feels like a bear market. If it walks like it, if it squawks like it, you might as well call it what it is, right? And it is a Bitcoin bear market. And we're seeing this represented in the Bitcoin chart because we are seeing, things that we're seeing support levels ultimately fall out, right? And this has been going on for a long time. I mean, once upon a time, it was say like the 53K level. Maybe people remember that, and we fell below that, so that support level fell out. Okay, and then another time it was some other support levels that have sort of fallen out. And you could even argue that looking at daily candles, we've already lost this trend line. Right? If you look at daily candles, if you just look up the wicks, you could still argue that it's holding. And again, this is the reason why I think a lot of Bitcoin bulls are holding on to the hope that we are still in a bull market right now. And again, I'm not going to sit here and say I know better. I'm saying, look, they could be right. Like, they could be right. But the problem is that, and what I've historically seen in Bitcoin bear markets, is that by the time the last remaining bulls are willing to admit they were wrong, the bear market's over. And so like in 2018, 6K was the bottom for a long time. And a lot of people were not really willing to admit it was a bear market. And then by the time the floor fell out and we dropped, when they finally admitted it was a bear market, the bear market was over. So you could see the same thing playing out again. Like, if the dollar continues to rally and it puts downward pressure on the price of Bitcoin, then by the time Bitcoin actually bottoms and the last bull standing says, all right, it's a bear market, the problem is by that point, the bear market is likely going to be over as the dollar tops whatever it's going to go to and Bitcoin hits whatever bottom it's going to go to. And then we're probably going to start anew. Okay, so I do want people to understand that a lot of the things that seem somewhat obvious in the past, they played out in a certain way because we were just risk off at the time. And right now, we remain risk off, okay? So if we remain risk off, what does that mean? It means that risk on assets like cryptocurrencies and stocks, like in equities, are likely not going to do so well in the short term, right? That's just fundamentally what it means. If, on the other hand, the dollar cools off, then we could go back to risk on. But right now, what's the point in fighting it? And remember, again, that if Bitcoin puts in a lower low, you're likely going to see the Bitcoin dominance shoot up. Okay, so I've been warning people about this for a while now. So listen, I'll say it again. If Bitcoin puts in a lower low, the Bitcoin dominance is likely going to go up. And if Bitcoin USD is going down while all Bitcoin valuations are going down, then that means all USD valuations are going down even more. Okay, so this is what you need to plan for and prepare for, and hunker down for a while, and then eventually we'll come out the other side. But right now, obviously, markets still remain risk off, and that's sort of the battle that we're facing. If we look to see where the dollar has gone in the past, obviously the 103 to 104 level is interesting because that's where we've previously topped in recent memory. But you can also see that back in during the .com bubble, it went all the way up to around 120 or so. Okay, So I honestly don't think we'll make it to 120. I'm not going to say it can't happen, because if it does happen, I would probably say that's likely the top for the dollar. But it certainly seems like a good chance we top out before getting all the way to the 120 threshold. But anyways, I hope this stuff is useful. I mean, I know the content has been very bearish recently, but we have to stick with the data. I don't want to deteriorate, or I don't want to just ignore the data to propagate a narrative, right? I want to say, hey, this is what the data says. Bitcoin remains below its bull market support band. All the resistance levels seem to keep remaining resistance levels, and support levels keep falling out. Why is this happening? Because the dollar is in a parabolic uptrend. I mean, cause and effect, I guess, is something to consider. I mean, the dollar is in a parabolic uptrend probably because people are selling their Bitcoin, and because people are selling their equities, and they're going to the safety of the US dollar. But as long as this support band remains resistance, or we can't hold above it whenever we get through it, I think it's safer to assume that the direction is going to continue to be somewhat bearish. Okay, does that mean we can't bounce occasionally? No. Does it mean we have to go back to 10K? Probably not. I mean, I don't think we're going to go back to 10K. I know a lot of people think that, but I don't think we're going to go back to 10K. Could we go back to 30K? Oh yeah, I mean, of course. So if we did it last year at this time, of course we could do it again. So I don't really understand why that seems like it's off the table. And then it begs the question, well, could we go back to the 20K level or the 25K level? I usually look at some of these longer term moving averages to tell me what is theoretically possible, and these are sort of like the accumulation phase of a lifetime scenarios. Okay, so like just imagine extending these moving averages, right? Like if we get some type of a move really down to the 200-week SMA, like we've seen before, if it's a wick below that I think would be an accumulation phase of a lifetime. I don't know if we're going to get it. I mean, I really don't. I don't know if we're going to get it. By the way, if you're curious, the 200-week SMA right now is approaching, it's at 21.6K. So, I mean, in another few weeks, it'll be at around $22,000. So it continues to move higher as Bitcoin has continued to move lower here over the last few months. I think we'll wrap it up there. We've talked about risk on versus risk off. We've talked about the Bitcoin dominance and how it affects altcoins. We've spoken about the Nasdaq and how it's been put in a lower low. You guys know the risk on the market. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it for you, right? Risk on assets remain in a bear market. Let's try to get through it and navigate it as best as we can until we go back risk on. And the way to do that is to make sure you have cash. Okay, because if you don't have cash, I don't know how you're going to buy anything whenever we think, whenever say the dollar is putting in whatever blow off top it's going to do. This is the same strategy I've been telling people on Into the Cryptoverse Premium since late November and December, right? Stack cash, be light on altcoins, heavy Bitcoin, and just be patient. All right. I think we'll wrap it up there. Make sure you subscribe if you're not subscribed. Give the video a thumbs up. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.